The worst year for a lot of us for our mental as well as physical health. So joining us this morning is best-selling author, coach Lisa Goldenthal.
Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa G, your host. You're at the top of your game, yet the game is changing faster than ever. Strategies that got you here aren't the ones that'll keep you here. The pressure is relentless, and the fear of obsolescence looms large. That's why I'm here. Welcome to the new podcast series, Disrupted: How to Be Gritty and Unlock Performance in Business, Mindset, Wellness, and Success to help you master disruption.
Thanks for coming, and I'll see you soon.
He's the founder and CEO of Predictable Profits and the creator of the Predictable Profits operating system. He's helped hundreds of 7- and 8-figure companies escape the founder dependence, break through growth plateaus, and build scalable systems for predictable month-over-month revenue. And that's why I am so thrilled to welcome to the podcast, Charles Gaudet.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited for this conversation. Did I say your name right?
You did. You did.
Yay. I always worry about that. Well, let's jump into it. Okay, good. Charles, so many companies get stuck relying on the founder to drive everything. How do you help CEOs step out of the bottleneck and finally build a business that scales without them?
Oh, that's such a great question. In fact, you're right. When you think about it, most businesses, they've got their business to a point because of hard work, word of mouth, and referrals, right? And so usually they can take their business to about that $1 to $3 million mark before they begin to hit that ceiling. And so that process of removing the founder, it actually all starts with removing the guesswork and having full transparency. It's about getting data around everything that they're doing so they know what's working, what's not working. And so as you begin to hire people, you're hiring for KPIs. So you're hiring for this is the metric that I need to improve. You have somebody own the KPIs, and you have the systems and the processes that take everything that you know between your ears. You have that documented there on paper, and then from there it's able to transfer that knowledge, and you train that knowledge to the employee. And the beautiful thing about that is you end up having a team where you take some of the pressure off your own shoulders, then you have a team that's able to help. So it's like having an extra rower in the boat rowing in the same direction as you. And when you're able to create these processes and have somebody work towards those processes and measure against the KPI, then you don't really have to worry too much about making sure that the person has all of this experience and all of this training and so forth just to make sure that you're going to get consistent results. Now it's just a matter of having a baseline of skill and following the process.
Well, that makes sense to me. I mean, if you don't have systems in place and you don't have processes in place, then you can't train people and hire them and scale. So that is great advice. I mean, you got to start with that. And every leader hits a ceiling at some point. What is the first move when the revenue starts to plateau and growth stalls?
Well, uh, you're right. We do hit ceilings, and we oftentimes hit a number of ceilings because the formula for growth is actions plus resources equal growth, right? And in the very beginning, we're all about actions. All we have is actions. But we're limited to however much time we have in the day. And then in our minds, we always tend to say to ourselves, well, when I make enough money, everything will tend to get better. But that seldom ends up happening, right? Because
Right.
you bring in more clients, and as you bring in more clients, then there's more demand on you, and then you start doing a little bit of everything, but then you also still have to be the rainmaker and bring in all this extra money. So just kind of go back to what we talked about in the beginning. As you hit the ceiling on your bandwidth and you say, okay, I can't take any more actions, then we have to leverage those resources. Now, resources come in multiple different forms. Resources do come in people. Resources come in processes and technology. And then resources also, with AI right now is an incredible opportunity to be able to leverage AI as an additional resource. Ultimately, what it comes down to is we're only limited by our imagination because all of the tools are available to us. It's just how we use the tool. And we don't really need any answers anymore. We just need to be able to know the right questions to ask, and then the answers end up presenting themselves.
It's such an exciting time to be alive for me. I'm really obsessed with AI, and I find that it's about the quality in. Like you have to have the right questions. You can't be just copying and pasting stuff. But if you knew the right prompts and questions, then you can have an assistant there. So I'm glad you mentioned that as a resource. I would love to jump into the predictable profits operating system.
Yeah.
Why, well, maybe we can explain the framework and why does it create the consistent growth when companies get stuck in this feast or famine cycle?
Got it. So the reason why we created it is we noticed in studying 9 and 10 figure companies that those 9 and 10 figure companies that stay on the growth track, they all operate from frameworks. Now, these frameworks were created by companies like BCG and Bain and McKinsey and so forth, but nobody had created a framework for 6, 7, and 8 figure companies to get them on the growth track and keep them there. And you know that to be true, but when you look at the data. When companies that are generally small, they do this growth at all costs type of mentality. And some of them are lucky enough to get themselves in the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies list. But then the Kauffman Foundation did a study and they found that 66% of all companies that made it on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies list within 5 to 8 years will either shrink in size, go out of business, or be disadvantageously sold. So, how do you make sure that you get on the growth track and you stay there? Well, the first part of the operating system is what we call setup. I talked to many different founders. In fact, I recently talked to a CEO as big as $500 million. dollars. And he says to me, Charlie, I do marketing. And I looked at him and I said, what does that mean? So you can't actually do marketing, but what does that mean? He says, I don't know. I said, well, let's break it down into the functions of marketing. Marketing is about how you create, capture, and then nurture that demand. So, how effective are you at creating that demand, at capturing and then nurturing? And he looked at me like I was a ghost because he realized that 2/3 of entire marketing function was operating in the dark. And so the basis behind everything is having a really, really strong setup. When you have that strong setup, especially knowing that 96% of all buying behavior happens before they get on the phone with you, buyers are researchers, they're trying to figure out who you are and if they're making the right decision. When you have that strong setup, that leads to buyer ready leads. And that's when you move to sales. When you get into the sales part of the operating system, not only is it qualifying the lead, it's closing mastery. So it's being able to break free from founder led sales. And then there's also this component of what we call maximum lifetime value because you want to resell these clients over and over and over again. The ideal is to be able to build it into some type of recurring revenue, and every business, regardless of the industry, has the ability to have that recurring revenue. There's a difference between recurring and reoccurring. Recurring means you have a set fee every single month and it continues to build. Reoccurring means, well, I might get a client now and then he might come back 2 weeks from now or 4 weeks from now, but they'll buy again. That is reoccurring. You want recurring
Oh,
revenue.
yeah. Thanks
And
for that distinction. Good to know.
For sure. And then the last part is then the scale. And scale, when you have a strong setup that creates a basis for sales, and then you get to scale. When you have scale, that's when you start building. You have really great data intelligence. You have an outstanding team, and you have processes and systems that keep the business running. See, but when you have sales and you have scale, but you're missing setup, you're going to experience cycles of feast and famine. Some months are up, some months are down. When you have setup and you have scale, but you're missing sales, you're going to get stuck. You're going to go up against the ceiling. The business isn't going to be growing fast enough. And then when you have sales and setup, but you're missing scale, then you're going to be saying the company is too dependent on the CEO or a few different key people. You put everything together and everything works out better. That's when you begin to experience consistent month after month, year after year growth.
Well, who wouldn't want that MRR? I
Well,
mean, that sounds pretty good to me.
A lot of people have these aspirations of selling their business and selling their business for an extraordinary amount of money. And the thing is most people aren't actually ready for sale. And when they actually do sell, they might make a decent penny. They might
Yeah.
get a few $1 million here and there. But
Yeah.
what they realize is that if they only had a few pieces in place, it could go from making some decent money to creating generational wealth. That means that you've made so much money that you never have to work again. Your kids won't have to work, and maybe their grandkids will never have to work. And so there's six major components that need to happen in order for you to really increase your odds of getting that generational wealth. Would you like me to tell you those?
I'm waiting on the edge of my seat, even though I'm standing.
So the first one is you need to have a very strong unique advantage point. Now, we've heard people talk about USP or unique selling propositions. And if you
Right.
go to business school, they say you need to have a unique selling proposition and the whole deal. But there's a disconnect with that because just because it's unique doesn't mean that your clients or your customers actually want it. And
Uh,
so you have to create a unique advantage. That unique advantage is what is the advantage that you're giving somebody that is so different from everybody else in your industry? That can be a different form of IP and how you do it. It could be in technology, a number of different things. So, number one, and every business can build a unique advantage point, every single one. And so you have to have number one, a strong unique advantage point. Number two, the company can't be dependent on the CEO. Number three, you need to be able to generate multiple different sources of leads and sales. So beyond word of mouth and referrals and beyond just having SEO traffic or the occasional partner that might send you business, you want to have robustness in your leads and your sales. Number four, and this is the one that you're really going to love, you want to have at least 50% of your revenue being either MRR or ARR, right? At least 50% of your revenue. The goal is if you can get 60%, that's even better. But you
yeah.
want a minimum of 50%. Number one, two, three. The next one is churn rate has to be below 5% per month. Or the other way you can look at it is retention has to be 95% or better per month. And so you want to make sure that the number of customers coming in is greater than the customers that you're losing, and so that the churn rate remains low and you have high retention. And then the last one is data intelligence, so that when you look around and you could say you have the right people in the right seat, you know what's working, what's not working, you know how much money that you're making per client, and yada yada yada. You put all that together and then you've positioned yourself for the greatest odds possible of creating that generational wealth.
Wow. It's so great that you have this in a formula. It's amazing because it sounds like such an amazing success formula. Do you have any more tips for entrepreneurs, CEOs, and founders out here that want to be unstoppable in these disruptive, uncertain times that we're living in, which could be right now, it could be all the time?
Sure. Um, well, we know that our buyers are researchers, right? And in a discerning market environment, it's funny because I was interviewed both in the NASDAQ and at the New York Stock Exchange. And when I was at the NASDAQ, the interviewer said, I read in your book that you love a bad economy. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like, what does that mean? And it's because there's no such thing really as a good economy or a bad economy, right? Those are just labels that are being put on it. The realistic is that way to look at it is that they're just different economies, and different economies require different strategies. But buyers are still there. It's just in a quote unquote bad economy, what ends up happening is buyers are more discerning. They're more careful. So instead of in a quote unquote good economy where money is freely available, they're less discerning. They're just, they go, okay, I want to buy this, and they go ahead and they buy it, and yada, yada, yada. But in a bad market, everybody is competing for the same dollar.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter what industry you're in or what product you're selling. People only have so much money left to spend. And so first you've got to convince them that what you're selling is the best decision for that dollar. And then once they're convinced that, this whole category, so let's say that you're an agency, just as for simple math. You got to convince them that yes, investing in an SEO is the best money for you right now. And then you get them convinced, okay, I'll invest it in SEO. And then you got to say you're the best vendor and sell them on that. So it's just a little more discerning. But why I love a bad economy is when you look at the competitors in this space, or any space, any business, the market goes down, and what do the gurus tell you? The gurus tell you, hey, you got to tighten your belt. You got to cut expenses. You got to reduce your staff, cut down on your marketing spend, go sit down in the corner, wait things out, and then come back. Well, it's great because as everybody else is kind of hiding and cowering and the whole deal, that allows you to create a situation where there's now the market is becoming more wide open and you're able to capture more market share better than you were able to do in a good, very noisy market. So when you look at companies that have created this extraordinary growth, you'll notice that there's this interesting phenomenon that so many of these companies had this huge amount of growth, huge amount of market share in these quote unquote bad economies because that's when they leaned in when everybody else was scared and running away.
Well, that is so encouraging. I love to always leave people with an encouraging message, and you are so much fun to talk to, Charles. Where can people
Thank you.
find more of you?
Well, you can find me over at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. There's resources where they can join our community and we can interact inside of the community. There's extra strategies, tips, resources, and whatnot inside of the community, and that link would be on predictableprofits.com. They can also check out my book, The Predictable Profits Playbook, or follow me on LinkedIn. But if you're going to follow me on LinkedIn, you got to tell me that you're on Lisa's podcast, and then I will accept you as one of my contacts. So as long as you tell me that you're on Lisa's podcast, I'll accept you. But yeah, you can always follow me on LinkedIn, and we can go from there.
Sounds great, Charles. Thanks for being on Whole CEO with Lisa G.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.